Well, thank you. Thanks very much. Wow, thank you. Thank you for your warm welcome. What a crowd, what a turnout tonight. You know, recently I was introduced on the stage in New York as the man who'd made $100 million in real estate in Australia. And I got up on stage and I also said, thank you very much. It was very humbling. But I added, I feel I ought to set the record straight. Firstly, when you're in New York, it may seem as though Australia and New Zealand are connected by the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but they're really separate countries. It wasn't Australia, it was down in New Zealand. And secondly, if the truth be known, it wasn't in real estate, it was actually in the oil industry. And thirdly, to be perfectly honest, it wasn't 100 million, it was only 10 million. And anyway, it wasn't me, it was my brother. And he didn't make 10 million, he lost 10 million. But apart from that, you've got the right person. You see, the whole point is things are never what they seem. We think we know the way something works or the way it's put together, but very often we are flat wrong. My belief is that real estate is not just a little bit better than other investments or even a lot better than other investments. It's hundreds and thousands of times better. But to convince you of that, you're going to have to change some of your paradigms. Remember what I said, things are never what they seem. One of my favorite statements goes like this. I know it's a bit provocative, but and there it is. Woman without her man is helpless. And I put that up there for a specific reason. The point is that things are never what they seem. If I ask you, what do McDonald's do? You all know that they make hamburgers, right? And it's true, they do make hamburgers. But making hamburgers is incidental to McDonald's operations. What McDonald's do is very clever. They go around the world and always buy up pieces of land on the left-hand side of the road leaving town for those countries that drive on the left, and on the right-hand side of the road leaving town for those countries that drive on the right. The reason why they do that is when you're driving home from work after a hard day at the office and you suddenly remember you haven't bought any groceries, what on earth are you going to do for dinner? You can see the McDonald's sign and say, oh, I'll just pull off the road and buy takeaways rather than having to cross the peak hour traffic. So they buy pieces of land on that side of the road, they pull down whatever's there, they put up a fancy glass structure, slap the big yellow M on it, and then they do three very clever things. Firstly, it's true that they sign up their franchisees for a high upfront fee. That's smart on McDonald's part. And secondly, it's true they have a contract such that every hamburger sold results in a commission coming back to McDonald's. Also very smart. But thirdly, and most importantly, McDonald's signs its tenants up on long-term leases. McDonald's owns just about every property that they operate out of. McDonald's is the world's biggest and swishest real estate company. You've all had a chance to read this. Could I have a show of hands, please? How many of you agree with the statement? And you're brave enough to admit it. All right, well, you came without your spouse, and you were opening right. All right, thank you. How many of you disagree with it? Oh, folks, we've got a turnout that is hopeless. We've got to backtrack here for a moment. What is the opposite of love? Hate, you all say. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. It's where you're indifferent about something. The worst thing you can ever be called is a nice person, because the word nice is an acronym for nothing inside me cares enough about you to have an opinion. You're nice. I'm telling you, if you want to be successful as a real estate investor or as anything else, you can't be indifferent. You've got to have an opinion. If you don't have an opinion, how will you make a decision? If you don't have an opinion as to whether it's a good deal, you'll never buy it. You're allowed to have an opinion. Doesn't matter if your opinion clashes with that of the person sitting next to you. Have an opinion. Be willing to make mistakes. The people who never make mistakes never learn. Those who make mistakes often learn very fast. So having said all of that, could I please have a show of hands? How many agree with the statement? Woman without a man is helpless. Thank you. That's quite a good turnout. And now, how many disagree with it? All right, thank you. That's most of you. Well, that's very interesting to see. What I want to do now is take this pen again and just put a couple of marks on this paper. I'm going to put a comma down here. Oh, no, I'm going to put a colon here, actually. And how about a comma here? Those of you who don't get it yet, ask someone discreetly in the break. Can you see how by adding 3 little marks to this piece of paper, we have completely changed the meaning of it? How many of you now agree with this statement? Oh, look at that. Have I redeemed myself, madam? Thank you. And how many now disagree with it? Oh, some of you. Okay, interesting. The point I'm making here is we had a statement about which most of you had an opinion, and then by putting 3 little dots on the paper, we suddenly completely changed the meaning of that sentence. And life can be like that. Things are never what they seem. Sometimes by changing a little aspect, your paradigms are shifted. And what I want to do tonight is show you by adding 3 metaphorical little dots to your perception about real estate, suddenly we might change it from being a lousy investment to being, wow, I never realized it was that good. That's pretty hot. Who would like to go on that journey? Okay, let's do it. I came from a family that prized education. Their belief system was to do well in life, you need to study hard. Because by studying hard, you can get qualifications and a degree. And with a degree, you can get a good job. And with a good job, you can build a career. And with a career, you can have financial security. Was that bad advice on the part of my parents? Well, it wasn't for them, right? They did to the best of their abilities. They tried to give us the tools we needed. It's the sort of education that they would have wanted to have. So from their perspective, it was great advice. So it was without much thinking that I went off to university. Didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't like the sight of blood, still don't really. That was medicine out. The thought of peering into people's mouths all day, I mean, yuck. That's dentistry out. I wanted to do law, but then you have to practice in the country in which you study, so I eliminated that. I went through this process of elimination and ended up doing engineering. However, during my first week at engineering school, I looked around me at these academics who were supposed to have made it. And they wore shabby clothes and drove around in old clunkers and lived in very modest homes. And I thought there's something wrong with my picture that academics have financial security. So I took it upon myself at the tender age of 17 to make a study of the rich. I wanted to know what is it that the rich have in common. Because I thought if I could identify 30 or 40 things that they have in common, and if furthermore I could emulate those things, then my chances of becoming fabulously wealthy surely would go up. Would you agree? Good theory. It didn't work though. Because at the end of this 9-month study, I concluded that the rich had very little in common. It wasn't age or gender or whether you were born into a rich family or not, or whether you were an immigrant family, whether you were the firstborn, the lastborn. It had nothing to do with any of those things. I could only find 2 things that the rich had in common. The first is that almost without exception, the rich had integrity. In other words, their word was their honor. If they said they were going to do something, they did it. Now here's a secret I learned about integrity long after my 9-month study at the age of 17. Integrity is not genetic. Do you hear what I'm saying? If you don't like the level of integrity that you've got, you can change it in a heartbeat. Just make the commitment to be more true to your word. And I'm telling you, your financial future will change. The second thing that the rich had in common, almost without exception, is that they either made their money or they held their wealth in property. In other words, the Hughes Corporation, they made their money because they had a patent on a diamond-tipped drilling bit. That's how they made their billions of dollars. But they didn't just hold it in stocks of diamond-tipped drilling bits. They bought real estate with it. So the rich either made their money or held their wealth in real estate. That's why I decided at 17, that's what I want to get into. Now, it wasn't easy as a 17-year-old kid going to a bank and asking for a mortgage. If you think I look young now, you should have seen me then. They thought I was 12. The first bank manager thought it was a prank. If you think that's tough, imagine what it was like for me as a 17-year-old kid asking a 17-year-old girl out on a date, and she too would think I was 12. Now, you may well laugh. I got to date the 17-year-olds for years afterwards. Just kidding. But anyway, it was tough getting my first mortgage. But I succeeded. I got my first property. And then as time went on, I bought more and more properties. It took 4 years to get an honors bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, not the easiest course around. They came to me and said, you know, it's only 1 more year for a master's. Why don't you do it? And I couldn't think of an answer. So I did it. And then I switched to PhD, and I ended up spending 8 years at university. They say there are 3 kinds of students: part-time, full-time, and eternal. I was the eternal variety. But at the end of those 8 years, I popped out with a little piece of paper that said PhD. Now think of my parents. Remember the ones with the philosophy that you have to study hard to do well. Do you think they were proud of their son? Oh, can you imagine? They were sitting by the telephone waiting for me to phone them to announce the acceptance of a job. And I had a couple of interviews. I remember going to one interview where they seemed impressed. They said, well, we want to take you on. We'll offer you a salary of $32,000. Now, before you scoff at that, back then, $32,000 was a handsome salary. And it would have been tempting. However, unfortunately for my prospective employer, I'd just completed a real estate deal that netted me $35,000. And I remember thinking to myself, why would anyone in their right mind work for 40 hours a week for 50 weeks of the year, turning up every morning at 8 or 9 o'clock saying, hi boss, here I am, what would you like me to do today, for $32,000 lousy when in 1 week you can make 35 and take the rest of the year off? So I never accepted that job, and to this day I have never had a job. You see, we're stuck in this trap thinking that we need to do what's not successful for us because there's no alternative. And I want to show you that there is an alternative. I was cajoled into writing a book. This first book here came out, Making Money in Residential Real Estate, co-authored with an Australian. It came out 10 years ago this year, and it's significant because in this book we describe a 10-year plan where if you buy one property a year for 10 years, you can end up with an equity of $1 million. Of course, in Sydney, an equity of $1 million doesn't mean much, but anyway. So we came up with this book. It's just a very easy read, 76 pages. People have achieved this $1 million of equity long before their 10 years was up, simply by buying more than one property a year. I was cajoled into sharing more details about what I do and how I do it. And eventually I thought, well, this is all very good and well, but I better check my audiences to see whether anyone's taking the information on board and earning $1 million or $2 million for themselves. Fair enough? And to my absolute horror, the percentage of people just like yourselves who would actually apply the knowledge I was giving them and go out there and make $1 million was very small, about 5%. And I was devastated. I thought, gee, am I not speaking clearly enough? Am I speaking too fast or too slow? It bugged me. So I embarked on my second big study. The first one wasn't the PhD, remember, it was what makes the rich rich. And the second study was, why is it that when you give people money or give them ideas, they don't act on it? Well, this study took a lot longer. This was an 11-month study. It really bugged me. I was racking my brain. I was doing all my research. And I came up with the answer. And the answer is embedded in a program I run, which takes a long time, way longer than we've got time for tonight. However, I can do an exercise in 3 minutes flat, which gets the same information as it would if we spent 2 days doing this. So I want your permission to go through this exercise. Before I ask you whether you agree or not, I warn you though, it involves something that you all think you like, but deep down you may despise. It involves cold, hard cash. Having said that, who would like to go through the 3-minute exercise? All right, most of you, good. I always believe that carrying money around on one's person is a very good idea. I think you should always have a lot of money, US dollars if you travel around a bit, Australian dollars. Could you confirm that this is a real Australian dollar note? We're not talking monopoly money or anything like that. I'm going to do an exercise here. If you've seen this or heard of it, please sit back, relax, enjoy the show, get another level of learning out of it. I'm going to say something and I want you all to act on what I say. I have here a $100 note from the Reserve Bank of Australia. Who will give me $50 for it? You sure?
You're going to give to me?
Yes, right. Is this a real note? Seems to be, all right. What's your first name?
David.
David. Congratulations, David. Let's give him a big hand. So, David gave me a $50 note, I gave him $100. Is it fair to say that David just made $50? Let's give him another round of applause. Well done. So So similarly, is it fair to say that I just lost $50? You're all saying, what a fool. But do it again, I'll know direct different this time. Did I lose $50 though? There are over 800 people in this room. Could it be that I'm willing to invest $50 in a room of 800 people, it's just cents per person, so that you can learn in 3 minutes flat, remember, what otherwise would have taken me a whole weekend? Is my time worth more than $50 for a weekend? You'd better believe it. Who couldn't have done the deal because you didn't have $50 on your person? Raise your hands up high, please, and look around you, not at the people, but at the number of hands up in the air. So thank you for being honest, but for whoever said, well, I don't need money because, you know, what would I need it for? Here is a prime example. You can do great deals, and real estate is like that, as we'll find it in a minute. Where's the plastic brigade? When I said, who will give me $50 for it, did I say in cash? Would I have accepted a credit card? Did anyone ask me? Would I have accepted an IOU? Absolutely, just to teach the rest of you a lesson. Can you buy real estate with an IOU? Of course you can. It's called a mortgage. It's not funny, it's true. All right, why else didn't you come up? Tell me. Too good to be true. Who thought it was too good to be true? Well, thank you very much. After I go to all this effort to talk about integrity, you think I'd go up there and say, who would give me $50 for this thing? Just as you come up, I say, nah, 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 nah. Thank you very much for your faith and confidence. Just because a deal sounds too good to be true doesn't mean to say that it is. It may be. Check it out. But if you don't check out deals that sound great, by definition you will be limiting yourself to those deals that are so lousy, those deals where the returns are so low, they're bound to be real. And I hope you all realize that this exercise has absolutely nothing to do with the lousy $50 inside this room tonight. It has everything to do with $50, 50,000, 5 million, 50 million outside of this room, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Because in all probability, the way you reacted to this exercise is the way you react to real deals in real life. I don't have the money. I don't need it anyway. It's probably a prank. Sounds too good to be true. They wouldn't take an IOU. Not even worth asking. Oh, someone else has got the deal. Look, there's someone fluffing around at that, you know, wherever it is. I want you to think about that. What's holding you back? What stops you from going out there and doing those deals? And it all has to do with belief systems. This is what my study showed me. That we're all brought up believing certain things. You go to one of your parents and say, hey, Mom or Dad, I want a bicycle. And they say, well, what do you think, kiddo? That money grows on trees. We've all heard that, right? Or we're told money is the root of all evil. Right? In fact, the actual saying was, for the love of money is the root of all evil. But we all think money is associated with being evil. We're told that in order to make money, you must have money. Hey, that's my excuse. I don't have any money. I can't make any. I'm poor. I was born this way. I'll probably die this way. So don't give me a hard time about it. The more you say that, the more it becomes a part of you. Even when we describe the rich, do we call them squeaky clean rich? No, we talk about them as the filthy rich. They are so rich, they are stinking rich. We associate being wealthy with filth and stench. So one exercise you may want to do, most of you won't, is tomorrow morning go to the bank and withdraw $1,000. Those of you that don't have $1,000 in the bank, you've got a problem. Withdraw $1,000 and carry it round on your person for an entire month. Because assuming that you won't be mugged, and I'm not guaranteeing that you won't, so don't blame me if you are. Assuming you're not mugged, assuming it's not stolen, assuming you don't lose it, and assuming you don't spend it frivolously, at the end of that month you will still have that $1,000 in your pocket. And you'll say, wow, you know what? I've overcome all those fears. I'm in control of this money. And something will happen inside of you. suddenly you will be in control of this thing that you've been frightened of. If you couple that with coming up with some new belief systems, instead of money's the root of all evil, or only my rich neighbors can afford stuff because they're doing illegal things, say, hey, money comes to me easily. Or become more evangelical about it. I am a magnet for money. Anything. And say that out loud if you think your spouse will not kick you out for saying it every morning and every evening. And say it when you get up and when you go to sleep. And do that for a month and carry your $1,000 around on your person. Your lives will change. Give it a go. What have you got to lose? You guys are so pragmatic, you know. Maybe I should say, what have you got to gain? Everything, exactly. So give it a go. All right, I want to talk about real estate because that's my passion. I love real estate. As I said, I don't think it's a little bit better or a lot better. I think it's orders of magnitude better. So the book I wrote most recently is called Real Estate Riches, and if you don't mind, could I have a show of hands how many have read this book? Just, okay, that's a good turnout. Thank you very much. It's also good to know we've still got new clients out there. That's fabulous. But I want to summarize 4 questions I pose in this book because they're at the core level of what I believe in. Let's imagine we want to compare investing in real estate with investing in other things. Now, other things for most Australians means the stock market, the share market. You can also invest in mutual funds or unit trusts, or it's still shares. Mostly Australians invest in shares. So I want to compare real estate with shares. Imagine also we have a lump of money. It'll be hard for some of you to imagine you have no money, but anyway, you will have by the time you invoke some of the things we're learning here. Imagine you've got $100,000 in cash. Could be more, could be less, doesn't matter. I'm going to ask 4 questions. First question goes as follows. You're going to use your $100,000 cash to invest in shares. How many dollars worth of shares can you buy with $100,000 cash? 100,000, right? I know some will say, but hang on, you can buy shares on margin. And that's true for a small number of investors, for a small number of shares, usually a small percentage of what's on the market, and then only for about 30% of the value. And if the shares go down a little bit, they have what's called a margin call. For most Australians, when you invest $100,000 in the share market, you have to put up $100,000 cash. Let's compare that with real estate. You have that same $100,000 cash. You want to buy real estate. How many dollars worth of real estate can you buy with $100,000 cash? $1 million easily, right? That means you need a 90% mortgage or $900,000. Now I know some of you think, well, hang on a minute. 900,000, even at 5%, that's 45,000 a year. That's more than I earn. How am I going to pay it? And the answer is, you will have an asset worth $1 million that's generating rental income. If you buy well, that will more than cover your mortgage interest. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 goes as follows. You've spent your $100,000 cash buying $100,000 worth of shares. The moment you bought them, what were those shares worth? 100 grand, right? Because by definition, there is only one price at which willing buyers and willing sellers are allowed to transact. The share market is very efficient. Whether you're buying in Tasmania or up in the Gulf of Carpentaria somewhere, or Darwin or Perth, you pay the same price. So you bought exactly $100,000 worth of shares. Let's compare that with real estate. The day you bought your property for $1 million using $100,000 cash and a $900,000 mortgage, what was that property worth? $1 million. Is it possible that it was worth $1 million? Sure it is. However, is it not also possible that some fast-talking real estate agent or seller talked you into paying $1 million for a property that's only worth $640,000? Is that possible? Sure it is. Does it happen? You better believe it. By the same token, is it not also possible that you just bought a property for $1 million that when you get a valuation report on it, it's worth $1.5 million? Is that possible? Does that happen? Every day of the week, folks. The question you might want to ask is, why would anyone in their right mind sell a property for $1 million when it's worth $1.5 million? Does anyone want to know the answer to that? Oh, you do? Okay. There are 101 reasons, folks. Every reason is unique. Every property that I've bought at below its true value has had a different reason as to why people have sold it for below its true value. Very often it's because the sellers are too stingy to engage the services of a valuer. They think, I know what the value is. Look, the house next door sold for $460, and the one up the road sold for $480. So if I get $520 for mine, I'm doing really well, aren't I? When in actual fact, any of a dozen valuers would have put a value of $595,000 on that property. It's the only one with a view, for heaven's sake. It's got a triple garage. Right? So being too stingy is a very common reason. A property might be bequeathed to 4 kids. One wants to live in it, the second one wants to rent it out, the third one wants to turn it into a commune, the fourth one's hiking somewhere. They have a big row. They just say, let's sell the property fast and split the proceeds. Or what very often happens, especially here in Australia, is people find their dream home. They sign up to buy it. They say, let's have settlement in 2 or 3 months. Plenty of time to sell our existing home. And then, of course, time goes by and suddenly they say, whoops, only 10 days before we have to settle and we haven't sold our home. What happens to the price? It comes down. Or someone bought a property back in 1962 for £1,500 and they think they're ripping you off by getting $500,000 for it when it's worth $700,000. The reasons are many and varied. The property I just bought in Phoenix, we bought it from a couple who unfortunately were divorcing. Not only were they divorcing, they had restraining orders out on each other, which means that by law they weren't allowed to be in the same place at the same time. They couldn't negotiate their side very well. Right, so you'll find 101 reasons why people sell real estate at below its true value. I love that. You can find a bargain every day of the week. All right, that brings us to question number 3. You've spent $100,000 cash on shares. The moment you bought them, they were worth exactly $100,000. What can you personally do to massively increase the value of those shares? Not much. Well, come on, let's be creative. Could you hope? Could you pray? Could you not write letters to the directors of these companies wishing them a good day? Could you perhaps go out and buy as many of the products and services as these companies make so that you boost their turnover and therefore their share value? Your options are limited, would you agree? Okay. The moment you buy your $1.5 million property for a purchase price of only $1 million using $100,000 cash and a $900,000 mortgage, what can you do to massively increase the value of that property? Paint it. Who said that? Who said that? No one wants to admit to it. Well, someone, you didn't say it, but of course you can paint it. Look, painting it singularly is probably the simplest thing you can do to massively increase it. I once bought a cottage for $60,000 on a Thursday. Now, it was pretty dilapidated. There was so little paint on the weatherboards that there was more wood exposed than paint. No one wanted it. It had been on the market for 3 months. I know exactly what other potential buyers would have thought. Look at that old dunger of a property. Paint's in bad condition. I bet the roof leaks too, which means the water's gone down to the floorboards. They'll be warped and rotten. The piles will be rotten. I bet the plumbing needs redoing and the wiring will be shot. Who'd want it? 60 grand. They've got to be kidding. So along I came, I bought it. I spent $400 painting it. Now, if you're really cheap, you could get away with only painting the front. You'd have an integrity issue. So paint the whole thing. $400. I sold it the following Tuesday for $80,000. Now, I call that a $20,000 weekend. Who likes the sound of a $20,000 weekend? Okay, absolutely you can paint the property. What else could you do to increase the value? Landscape, absolutely. You could put in a flower bed. You could put up a new nice white picket fence or paint one that's there already. Perhaps change the letterbox. There are, again, 101 things you can do to massively increase the value of a property without spending much money. Who'd like a list of 101 things you can do? All right, well, that was the book I finished 2 weekends ago now. It's literally called that. 101 things you can do to massively increase the value of a property without spending much money. We've got wacky ideas. Just shampooing the carpets might do it, or perhaps replace the carpets. You don't have to buy new ones. You can get great second-hand carpet or end-of-run carpet. Or maybe lift the carpet and see what wood is underneath. If it's nice wood, get a commercial sander in to sand it, polyurethane it, and you've got a beautiful wooden floor. Change the doorknobs. Sometimes just putting brighter light bulbs in the house will do it, because it looks bigger and roomier. All right. If you've got a really expensive home here in Sydney, or one of those $2 million plus homes, would you like to know how you can spend $200 on concrete to increase the value by $20,000 or $30,000? No? All right, then I'll move on. Look, all you do is you pour the concrete in the middle of your rambling front yard somewhere, and you get a paintbrush out and you paint a white H on it with a circle around it. And then the society magazines will be able to say, oh, the so-and-sos have a helipad. Look, you're limited by your imagination. There are so many things you can do to massively increase the value. My favorite example is the carport. And it goes like this. Imagine you have a rental property, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, doesn't matter. It doesn't have a garage or a carport. Do you think that your tenants would prefer it if there were a carport there? Of course. Would they be willing to spend more money to have a carport? Yes. $20 a week, is that an exaggeration? Is that too much? You'd easily get an extra $20 a week, right? Now ask yourself, how much would it cost to build such a carport? A carport is just 4 poles and then a roof with a slope on it. Again, if you're really cheap, you could probably get away with 3 poles. It would look odd, but you'd get away with it. So 4 poles. I maintain you can build a carport for $1,000 easily. You get $20 a week extra in rent. Over the course of a year, that's $1,000, right? With which other investment that you can name can you spend an extra $1,000 on it and then get $1,000 a year forever coming back, indexed for inflation? That's 100% return. That's pretty good. As I say in the infomercials, but wait, it gets better. Imagine you didn't pay for the carport yet. Right? It's cost $1,000. You bring the valuer back in and say, look, I'm getting $1,000 extra a year in rent. What's the value gone up by? He's likely to cap that rental out. We won't go into cap rates here, but he'll cap it out by around 10%. And say it's gone up by about $10,000. You go back to the bank and borrow a modest 70% of that, you'll get $7,000 from the bank. And now you have to pay mortgage interest on it, which even at a generous 10% would just be $700 a year. You're collecting $1,000, $700 in mortgage interest. That means you've still got $300 a year indexed for inflation for the rest of your life. You use $1,000 of that $7,000 to pay for the carport. It's paid for, correct? That leaves $6,000 in your pocket. Now ask yourself, is that $6,000 income? It's not, is it? So there's no income tax owing on it. Is it a capital gain? No, no capital gains tax. Is it the sale of something? No sales tax. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no tax obligations on that lump of money that you've just put in your pocket. And if you think, well, who would do it for a mere $6,000? What if you had 20 homes like that and you put up 20 carports? Would $120,000 cash with no tax obligations legally? Would that appeal? At what point would you say, yeah, I think I could do this? You see, you are limited by your imagination. And the difference is, and I want to come back to this first statement I put up here, as some of you saw it and thought, you didn't even think of figuring out a different way. When other people go looking at real estate here in Sydney and they see a house without a garage or a carport, they say, God, who'd want that? It'd be hard to find a tenant for. And they move on. And I get driven by real estate agents, doesn't have a garage or a carport. I have difficulty containing my excitement. I can see $6,000 on the footpath, waiting for me to say, hey, stop here, just to pick it up. The thing about this whole game is it's simple. It is so incredibly simple. It just defies reasoning as to why more people don't do it. Part of my mission is to share my views on why it's so easy so that you can do it. I know one of the reasons why people get put off is firstly the media. The media tends to be against real estate. And the financial planning industry is against it. That's why you'll get funny reports, often from financial planners or consultants or people in other industries who will say things, well, hang on a minute. In Australia, property only went up by 6% last year on average, whereas the shares went up by 7%. Why would you be bothered with property for a lower return and all the management hassles when you can get a higher return from shares? Is that a pretty good argument on the surface? Pretty compelling, isn't it? But you now know some of the anomalies with this argument. In fact, it's patently ridiculous. Because as we've said, when you buy shares, you put up all the money. When you buy real estate, you only put up a small fraction of it. So you've got leverage. So let's explore that. I want to talk about the yield that you get on most cash investments. So yield, by definition, it equals the return that you get, or the money coming out, divided by the investment. So let's put some numbers to it. Let's say we have the same $100,000 cash and we want to put that in the bank. So our investment is $100,000. And the income we're earning from it is $6,000 per annum. Very reasonable, right? You get a return on it at $6,000 per annum. The investment's $100,000. What's your yield? What's the percentage return? 6%, right? It's not rocket science. I know for the purists amongst you, it will change a bit depending on whether you're paid weekly or monthly or quarterly or annually, and whether the interest is paid in arrears or in advance. But in general, the return will be around 6%, and that 6% is an accurate reflection of how your investment is working. Now, when we compare that with real estate, it's a bit tricky, because the yield on a piece of real estate, by definition, equals the rental income divided by the purchase price. Nothing wrong with that. The rental income divided by the purchase price. So let's talk in terms of a property that we bought for $100,000, and our rental income is $6,000. Again, what is the yield on this property? 6%, right? You all agree with that? 6%. It's simple. That is the yield by definition. However, it is no longer an accurate reflection of how this investment is working, for the simple reason that the purchase price may have been $100,000, but have you necessarily put in $100,000? The answer is no. You might have only put up 10% as a deposit and the rest was borrowed. So if you in fact put up $10,000 and you've still got $6,000 coming out, then you've got $6,000 over $10,000, which is 60%. Big difference, right? But hang on a minute. We now have a mortgage of $90,000, and we are paying interest on that. Say at 5%, $90,000 would be $4,500. So our returns are now only $1,500 divided by the $10,000, which is 15%. Still a lot better than the share market at 7%, but it's different from what we started off with. In addition to the mortgage interest, we've got maintenance issues, rates, insurance, pest control, letting fees, management fees, all those other expenses that degrade your income and will give you a worse yield. On the other hand, there is also one aspect to real estate that you get which increases your income. Does anyone know what it is? Depreciation. It's often called a phantom income. You can legally depreciate the property even if it goes up in value for taxation purposes. The effect of that is effectively that the government gives you some money. They're encouraging you to invest in real estate. We'll explore that a bit later on. What I'm getting at is that whereas it's very easy to work out the yield on a cash investment, it is very difficult to work out the true return on a piece of real estate. That's why working it out on a piece of paper is not very wise. And what we do is we revert to a computer analysis. And I want to go through that with you here. We have a program called REAP, Real Estate Acquisition Program, where you can put in all those pertinent details of the property and then figure out whether or not it's a good deal. One of my golden rules is I think you should look at 100 pieces of real estate in order to find 10 that you might want to put offers in on, in order that you might get 3 offers accepted that you then have to finance so that you can buy one. It is a numbers game. All right? And how are you going to look at 100 pieces of real estate if you don't have an efficient way of analyzing them? So what I'd like to do is go to the screen here and show you how we can easily enter this data. Firstly, when we start the program, we've got 3 big icons up on the screen. The first one here is a map of the world where we set up the locations and the parameters for that location. So you can do this in various countries. The USA, Australia pops up here, for instance. This is where we put in things like the tax scales that are in use. Right, so once you've set up your country, you then go to the screen where we input data on a property. Now here we get to a very interesting point, because I can give you examples of properties I've bought, and you're all going to yawn and say, yeah, no wonder. I bet all the agents around town give them their best deals, even if it's just so that they can say, hey, we sold a property to Dolf. Well, it doesn't work that way. But my deals are pretty good. If I analyze one of mine, you're likely to say, no wonder, that's a de Ross deal. So is there anyone here who has just bought a property, or perhaps more interestingly, you're about to close on one or settle on one, and you want to know whether it's a good deal? And before you volunteer, I've got to tell you. We once did this for a large real estate firm, and their second in command said, yeah, I've just bought one. And we analyzed it, and it turned out to be a dog. So you've got to be willing to fail in this one. Is there anyone who's just bought a property, and you know all the numbers on it? You know the rates and the insurance and all that sort of thing? You're not so sure? You do, sir? Okay. What's your first name?
Tom.
Tom. Thanks, Tom, for volunteering for this. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load a new property, and we're going to call it Tom's Pad. And And here we go. We set everything to 0. The first thing we have to do is set it up for Australia. I presume it is in Australia, Tom. We won't put the address details in. Have you bought it already, or are you about to buy it? It's happened today. How exciting. All right. Well, here we go. First question is, well, it is. He can't go back now. You know, it is what it is. So, Tom, do you mind sharing, what did you pay for it? 99,000. Have you had a valuer in to value it?
Yes, I have.
And what did he say?
132.
All right, let's put in 132, if you don't mind. We can see later what would happen if we made it 140. So we've got 132. The conveyancing cost, the cost of putting it in your name.
$132.
Oh, you do know the numbers, okay. $1,132, done. If there are any other costs that come to mind once we've gone through, remember to sing out about them. We've
$142.80.
You do know the numbers. All right. I hazard a guess that you'll know what the property, or what is it called, the rates are.
Yes, the rates are $798 a year.
798. Okay, great. Now, we said before that we can depreciate the building. Notice we said the building, you cannot depreciate land. So to work out how much we can depreciate, we have to know either of the purchase price, how much is represented by land and how much is represented by building, or you get that from your rates demand. We're estimating here, unless Tom, and I suspect you may know, but unless you know better, that 75% of the purchase price is building and 25% roughly is land. Is that about right? It tends to be roughly right for single dwellings in Australia. The initial cash investment, how much cash are you envisaging putting into this property?
The deposit was $10,000,
Uh-huh.
and I am going to put in about another $7,000 for the renovation costs.
All right, so let's put in $17,000 in total. The next slot is for taxable income. I won't ask you that, Tom, but the program needs to know what your taxable income is so that when you have some depreciation items, you get the rebate, if you like, at your appropriate marginal tax rate. So if you put in your exact income there, the software will deduct every depreciable dollar at the appropriate rate. Let's just put in a figure, say, of 60,000, just a sort of median number in Australia. And when you do it for yourself, you can tweak that, of course. Now, we said there'll be no manager, so there are no management fees. Is it?
I've got a real estate manager. They charge 8%.
All right, so we can put in the percentage here, 8%. All right, we're nearly there. We now come to the loan. The loan has to be for all the costs, less, your deposit, obviously. What sort of a loan did you get on it, Tom?
Interest only.
For how many years?
5 years initially.
All right, and the interest rate?
5.73.
Is that reasonable, folks? Yep, it is, isn't it? And then any costs associated with getting the loan?
Yes, there were.
How much was that?
$1,300.
Wow. All right, and any establishment fee for the loan? Often it's 1% or half a percent.
Yes, there was, yes.
How much was it, do you know?
About 1.5%.
Wow, that's a lot, too. Okay, 1.5%, there it is. Mortgage insurance?
Yes, that was about $1,300.
Whoa. Okay, so here we've got all our costs for the loan. So far it's just under $4,000. That's quite huge. And this is where we said renovations. We had $7,000 worth of renovations, right? So now the final thing we need is the rent per week.
$300.
$300. Is that real?
Yeah, it's got a two-bedroom flat at the back of the house.
So it's a home plus income.
Yep.
Very smart. Who would have thought that for $99,000 you could buy two sources of income? Do these deals exist? Of course they do. Tom's just showing you how to do one. Okay, we're now in a position where we can start looking at all our assumptions. And to do that, we go to our reports. Tom's putting in $17,000. In the first year, he pulls out $7,100, then $5,100, $5,300, $54, and $56. And at the end of 5 years, his equity has gone to $80,000. To do that, a bank would have to offer you over 5 years 82% return on your money. And this is not a fudge factor, folks. This is real. This is the way it is in reality. This is why real estate is so good. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, so let's look at the graphs. And here we go. The first graph goes like this. Who pays the interest bill? And we can see that in this case, the tenant pays 100% of it. He pays all of it. That's a pretty good deal, isn't it? You're not contributing to that interest at all. We go down to the next one. Property cash flows. Let's have a look at that. $17,000 going in. Look at this. Both pre and after tax, yellow and blue, we're into huge positive cash flow. Looks like a great deal. And the one that interests me most is this one here, property versus cash. Imagine if Tom put a $17,000 in the bank. How much could he earn on it? Come on, some of you must have money in the bank. 4.5. So would you agree that 6% is generous? All right, let's put in 6%. We're going to compare Tom's $17,000 in the bank growing at 6% versus the same $17,000 in this property growing at only 5%. Are you ready? Here we go. Here is $17,000 in the bank growing at a whopping 6% versus $17,000 in Tom's property growing at only 5%. By the way, this graph, better than any words I can use, describes why I am in real estate. That sums it up. If you don't understand anything I'm saying, just remember that graph. How is it possible that something growing at 6% has almost negligible growth, whereas something else growing at only 5% can beat the pants off it? Why is that? Leverage. That's right. It's because the 6% growth is on the 17,000 cash input. The 5% growth on the real estate is not on the $17,000 cash components. It's not even on the $99,000 purchase price component. It's on the $130,000 market value component. It's 5% of $132,000 in the first year alone. Now, before we go any further, ask yourself this question. Can you think of any other investment scenario where you can earn income, pay all your expenses, and then you end up with your net pre-tax income? You pay tax on it, and you end up with more than you did before you paid tax. Do you see what I'm saying? With any other business, if you earn $5,000 after all your expenses, you expect to pay tax on it, right? Well, here you've got a way where you earn income and you don't pay tax, you get money back. We're earning more after tax than we had before tax. The internal rate of return is still infinite. I now want to do one thing which I find very amusing. Let's compare putting no money in Tom's property versus putting no money in the bank at 6%. In fact, well, because it's so inequitable, let me make it 8% interest. So here we have no money in the bank at 8% interest versus no money in Tom's property growing at only 5%. I think Tom deserves a round of applause. Thank you, Tom. You know, there are a number of comments floating around saying, hey, this is Sydney. Where would you find a $99,000 property? Look, do we need to take you by the hand and lead you to it? Yes, you all say. Then you'll say, this sounds too good to be true. It must be a trick. These deals are real. If you think $99,000 is a good deal, I once bought a property in Queenstown. Who's been to Queenstown, just to show you? There are quite a few. So you know how beautiful it is, right? It was in one of those realtor magazines with lots of color photos and a description. Here they had this little wooden 2-bedroom cottage, and the caption read, "Help Jed Shift, offers over $20,000 considered." And my initial reaction was, this has to be a typographical error. But I made the call anyway, and I said, tell me about it. And the real estate agent said, well, the owner has absconded back to England owing everyone money. They just want to recover some of their losses. I said, interesting. Tell me. You ask for offers over $20,000. When you ask for offers over X dollars, does anyone ever offer you X plus 5,000 or X plus 10,000? And she thought about it and she said, actually, no. I said, well, in that case, I'll make an offer of $20,000. Now, I did something which I want you to think very carefully about. What I did is I wrote out a check and stapled it to the contract. All right, now, does this change the legality of the offer I was making? Not at all, right? It doesn't change it because if they accepted my offer and I hadn't written that check, would they have had to come to me and say, we need the deposit? Would I have had to pay that deposit? You bet. Conversely, if they don't accept my offer, can they bank the check? No. So it doesn't change the legality of it at all. However, by having a check stapled to the contract, it makes it a very seductive document. No, it does. They think, if we countersign, we can bank that check. It makes it very real. It lets them see that you are serious. So, always staple a check to the contract. I did this. Well, they sent it off to the bank. The bank was in a mortgagee position, they'd taken over. And they wrote me a letter. I don't know if they recognized me as the property investor, but they said, Dolf, surely you realize that this property is worth a lot more than $20,000. Why don't you come back with a decent offer? And I thought about that for a moment, and I wrote them a letter. And I said, well, you say it's worth more than $20,000, but who are you to say so? You're a bank. You're not property investors. You fund other people. In fact, if you really understood it, you'd probably invest. But anyway, I didn't have that letter. I said a real estate agent may be induced to suggest a high price to get a listing or a low price to make a sale. A valuer might suggest a slightly higher price to appease a seller or a slightly lower price to appease a buyer. There is only one price at which everyone can agree on that property is worth that amount. And that is the one price at which a willing buyer and a willing seller meet. And if you think it's worth a lot more than $20,000, I suggest you find a buyer who agrees with you and sell it to them. In the meantime, to show you that I'm still a serious candidate, I will raise my offer to $22,000. Oh, do you think they accepted it? No way. They wrote back and said, that's ridiculous. However, if you raise the offer to $22,500, it's yours. So what do you think they were doing by getting an extra $500? It's called saving face. They didn't want me to be able to say, well, I got that property for what I was willing to offer. They wanted to be able to say forevermore, De Ross tried to get that property at his price, but we forced him to come up to our price. Was it a problem for me? No, $22,000 and a half. I bought it sight unseen. I phoned my tradesman that I used down in Queenstown. I said, hey, I've just bought this property. Check it out, will you? So he phoned back later on that day and said, well, I've had a look. It's not bad. The front door's shot. You'll have to replace that. And the shower cubicle, it's all of that sort of hardwood. It's all rotted away. You'll have to replace it. You should put a fiberglass shower cubicle in there. I said, all right, see to it. Well, as proof that he had integrity, he could have taken me for a ride. Instead, he phoned back 5 minutes later. He said, have you seen what's in the basement? I said, I didn't even know it had a basement. He said, there's a brand new front door there and a fiberglass shower cubicle. Amazing. About 3 weeks later, I went down to Queenstown. I was seeing my property manager down there. I said, hey, let's check out this new place. So he was showing me through it, and I said, you never told me you had a tenant in it already. He said, I don't. He said, well, to whom does all the stuff belong? He said, what stuff? I said, come on, the crockery, the cutlery, the microwave oven, the kitchen chairs, the table, the linen, the closets, the beds, the mattresses, everything. He said, oh, that all came with the house. These deals exist, folks. It's been rented out ever since. I don't know what my return is. It's huge. But those deals exist. If you don't think $99,000 deals exist in the greater Sydney area, you won't find them. You won't even go looking for them. When someone gives you one on a silver platter, you'll say, oh, there's something wrong with that one. Do I ever phone for these seemingly incredible deals and I'm told by someone, what, are you an idiot or something? That's a typo. Of course it's not 20,000, or of course it's not 99,000. Do you think that happens? Of course it does. But about once in every 20 attempts like that, I find one that's just a steal. There are many, many deals out there. A lot of people are reluctant to borrow money. They think there's something wrong with getting money from a bank or from anyone else. There's not. There's nothing illegal or immoral about it. Banks make their money that way. They accept depositors' funds, pay them a measly interest rate, and then lend it out in the market at a higher rate. It's just a very legitimate way of doing business. But people get scared having a lot of debt. They get scared because we've been brought up to believe that debt is bad. Don't you dare buy anything until you've got the cash to pay for it. Who's been told that? Sure, lots of us, right? So we think, well, since real estate requires us to borrow a lot of money because I don't have any, and therefore I can't do it because borrowing is bad. And as Robert Kiyosaki says, there's a difference between good debt and bad debt. Bad debt is debt on stereos and cars and things that go down in value the moment you buy them. Good debt is debt on assets that go up in value. In fact, I don't sleep well at night when I don't have enough debt. And the reason is as follows. When you owe the bank $5,000, you've got a problem. But when you owe the bank $5 million, they have a problem. And they do funny things. They phone you up and say things like, hey there, how would you like to go out to lunch this week? And you get all excited. You say, yes. But you're a smart cookie. You say, hang on a minute. We went out to lunch last week, and you guys shouted, I suppose you want me to. And you're about to finish the sentence, and they say, of course, it's on us, as usual. Why would the banks phone you and take you to lunch when you owe them $5 million? Because they want to give you more money. Why would they want to give you more money instead of someone that only has borrowed 100,000 or so? Good investment, good risk. Exactly. Because you always, how frequently? Always pay the interest on time. Why would you do that? So they give you more money. It's a vicious circle. They want confidence in you. When you buy your first property, they might think you're a hot-headed fool who's been to some seminar and you're just doing this on a whim. What will be the flavor next week, you know? But when you've bought 1, 2, 3, when you're on your 10th property, especially when you've got a few mortgages with that particular bank and you've got a history, a track record of always paying on time, they're going to think you're a great risk. They want to give you more money. We've got a whole section we could do on how to apply for a mortgage in such a manner that you're almost guaranteed to get it. And the way you do that, just very briefly, is you create a document. Instead of going to the bank cap in hand saying, please would you consider me for a loan, maybe, you've got to turn it around. Most people think you get a loan from the bank. Doesn't that put you in a weak position? You're asking them for something. How would you like to offer them something? This is how it goes. You want to buy a piece of real estate but don't have the money. And even if you have the money, you wouldn't use cash to buy it, right? Okay. The banks have all the money and fortunately don't want to buy it. So you go to the bank and say, hey, chums, you've got all this cash in the bank. I want to buy a property, I don't have the money, or I choose not to use it. Why don't we do a deal? You lend me the money to buy the property, and I will give you a pledge that I will faithfully pay interest every time it's due, and I will pay back principal on some prescribed basis. So they give you the money, you give them the pledge. That pledge is called a mortgage. All right, so all you need to do is convince them that you're a good risk. You go to them and offer them an investment. And in this proposal for finance that I can talk about in more detail when we have more time, the first sentence is, a mortgage of however much, $99,000, is offered on a property situated at, well, Tom didn't tell us where, but anyway, wherever it's situated. Did you hear what I just said? A mortgage is offered of so many dollars. We're offering the bank a mortgage. All we ask in return is the money. But can you see how psychologically, instead of going there cap in hand saying, please consider me for this loan, you are offering them something. In fact, if you're really smart, what you'll do is you'll create 20 or 30 copies of this document and you'll hawk it around all the banks. And you don't need to be surreptitious about it and say, oh, here's your copy, and pretend you haven't got any others. I'm bold and upfront about it. Say, well, you've got copy number 13. I've already been to these banks. It's first up, best dressed, or whoever offers me the best terms, they're the ones I'll go with. And suddenly you'll find that the banks are vying for your business. In fact, banks want to lend you money. If you don't write anything else down tonight, I suggest you write that down. Banks want to lend you money. And then the follow-up sentence is, let them give it to you. Now, always at the end, there are always people who whinge and say, yes, but I don't have any cash, so I can't do it, because banks will only lend me 80% or 90%. Well, there's nothing to stop you traveling around. I remember in the 70s in the Netherlands, banks were offering 125% mortgages. They were offering you more than the purchase price. Was that legal? Of course it was. Everything with real estate, just about everything is legal. Why were they offering more money? They wanted to give you more money. Firstly, the banks were awash with money. They wanted to give you more money so that you could renovate it. And, you know, do up the kitchen or the bathroom, or perhaps build an extra bedroom. The value of the property would have gone up because of those renovations, so the bank still has collateral to cover themselves. They just wanted to give you money. Well, in the States at the moment, you can get 120% finance. Not on every deal, but on many deals. So one thing I'll encourage you to do later on is look further afield than your own backyard. In fact, I would say this to you. If you guys have all of your investment eggs in one basket, the Australian basket, then maybe you should rethink that. The Australian market is but a small percentage of the total worldwide market. Do you want to have all your risk in one country? And it's not being seditious or trying to get you to be traitors to your own country. For heaven's sake, I encourage Americans to invest down here. There's probably more money coming in here than would ever go out. I would strongly encourage you to look at all your financing options. So one of the whinging questions I get is, where I come from, you won't get a 70 or 80% mortgage. Look around, shop around. And if they don't give it to you, does that stop you from buying it for zero down? Of course not, folks. How else could you buy real estate without putting any cash in yourself? You think it's possible? Of course it is. How would you do it? Use your equity in your own home. That's possible, isn't it? Let's say you've got a home here in Sydney, it's worth $500,000, you've got a $300,000 mortgage. Could you borrow another $50,000 against your own home to help buy an investment property? Of course you can. Is mortgage interest on your own home tax deductible? It's not, right? But if you take out an extra $50,000 to buy an investment property, is the mortgage interest on that $50,000 tax deductible? Sure it is. So you win all round. So you can do all of these things. Not only that, it's surprisingly simple. So you can use the equity in your own home. What else could you do to buy a property without using any of your own money? An IOU. From whom? The vendor. Exactly. Ask the seller, are you willing to leave in $60,000? Do you think they're going to laugh at you? Some will. But think of it this way. You've got an elderly couple, they've raised 5 kids, they've got a 6-bedroom home. It's too much for them to manage. It's gone up in value enormously. It's now worth $1.2 million. They are downsizing. They're buying a nice little apartment. It's worth only $800,000. That leaves $400,000 cash left over. What are they going to do with that money? So you come along and say, all right, well, I'll buy your property. However, I'd like you to leave $300,000 in, and I'm willing to pay 6% interest for however many years, 5 years. They're comparing that with the measly amount of money they'd get by having it in the bank. They're likely to say to you, $300,000, are you sure you don't want $400,000? Some people relish the thought of still having some ownership of the property they've lived in for 40 years. So ask. If you don't ask, you'll never find out. If you find a deal tomorrow, it's on the market at $1 million, it's worth $3 million. You don't have $1 million. Could you buy it? What would you do to buy it? Well, you could try the banks. What if the bank said no? What would you do? Yes, sir. Get some money from a friend. Do you think you'd find friends who'd be willing to go house with you on a deal? You put up the money, you get half the profit. There's $2 million profit in it. Is that possible? Of course. Again, you're limited by your imagination. And the thing is, I don't want you to just sit there and say, oh, that might work, or that's possible. Start dreaming up your own ideas. Run an ad in the paper. Terrific deal found, wanted, equity partner. You might get 20 phone calls, of which 3 are real contenders.